I'm Tessa Hunkin. This is my new best friend, Ralph Sadler. Unfortunately, he won't be saying much today, which is much to my disappointment, because I would like him to do the talk rather than me. But as he wasn't around when any of this was done, he wouldn't be able to add that much anyway. So, yeah, it's down to me. This lovely book, which we were honoured to have published last year, lots of copies here. So if you're inspired by the pictures you see this afternoon, you can buy a beautiful, beautiful book that records much of the work that you'll see here. So the idea behind this talk is just to give you a bit of the background to the project and to try and explain to myself as much as you lot really why it's gone on so long and why we've done so much. Yeah, it starts way back in a slightly unexpected place. I don't suppose there are a lot of villa fans here, but this is from my past when I was a commercial mosaicist. I worked I had a little company and we did commercial mosaics. Before that I'd been an architect, so I was interested in doing large things, not terribly interested in small things. So this was my kind of scale, although possibly not the most imaginative mosaic in the world. Next one, left-hand side, even better remunerated work for the Catholic Church. We did a lot in Westminster Cathedral, which was, you know, fantastic experience, working with the best materials, acres of gold mosaic, fantastic. But there were drawbacks. For a lot of commercial work, you don't get to do the designing yourself, and so you do whatever you're told to do. The Catholic Church, obviously, asked the wrong gender to do any designing for them, and so we were always working to other designers. This is the Vaughan Chantry in Westminster Cathedral. It is very lovely, designed by Christopher Hobbs, who was a curious choice. He was a film designer, also worked for Derek Jarman. Makes a good CV. Yeah. Sometimes we did get to do our own design, so this is one that I did for my local pub actually. But working in the commercial sector is, you know, it's challenging. Small businesses are challenging. Mosaic, there's not a vast amount of call for it, and there's a lot of commercial pressure, not least because you have to find the rent. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this story. It's that, you know, you can set something up in London and gradually the rents go up and it all falls to pieces. So we were facing that kind of crisis at Mosaic Workshop. And so I had to think of some way of continuing to make mosaic, which by then had become sort of part of my bloodstream. I couldn't really function without it. But to make it work in the modern world, in a you know, so that it kind of fitted other things that were happening. You know, we didn't have slaves anymore, and we didn't have you know, marble cubes were no longer a waste material that was easily found. You know, there were lots of things about mosaic, incredibly labour intensive. So many things about it that don't really conform with the modern world. So yeah, scratching my head. But while I've been working commercially, I had developed an interest in working with people with mental health problems. We sold mosaic pieces, and sometimes a group would come to us who were a mental health project. For 6 months when they came out of psychiatric hospital, they were working for a fantastic little organisation called Workshop and Company, led by the wonderful Susie Ballage. And she would bring them to our shop, and they were so enthusiastic and they loved mosaics so much. And I thought, ooh, they love it almost as much as I do. And surely there's some kind of opportunity here. They wanted to come and work for us in the workshop, but somehow combining that with the pressures of commercial life seemed a step too far. But I did go and help Susie at her project, and I learned a lot from doing that. I think I went in with the sort of romantic idea that they would all be outsider artists, you know, and that they would have the most fantastic, outlandish, creative ideas. And what I discovered, much to my surprise, but it's actually, yeah, I kind of understood it when I got it. But what they found really therapeutic was just the act of making, of sitting and using their hands, and in a very relaxed way, so that you could be with a group of people. You didn't necessarily even have to look at them. And somehow that made talking to other people easier, and it gave them an occupation, and then they produced something at the end of their time. So their time became useful rather than hanging heavy on their hands. It was then, their hands became useful again. And that seemed to me a really good idea. And then I thought, well, at the time they were only making sort of little things to sell. But then I thought, well, maybe we could bring them all together and make something bigger. So we went in for a competition. This was before 2008, so there were still public art commissions, and winning hard. I'm making this with people who recovering from mental health problems, and of course we won the competition. I was slightly nervous. I didn't know whether we could do it. It's for a theatre in Carmarthen in Wales, long way from Hackney, but it's where it started. And the design, I did the design based on the Black Book of Carmarthen, which is a fantastic medieval manuscript with very lively and simple drawings in it. But I sort of divided the project between, some of it was done at my commercial studio, which was still running at that point, and then the animals were made by the people at Workshop the company, and it was such a good fit. And I learned another lesson by doing this. One was that it worked fine, working with people with different abilities, but that personally I actually rather preferred the ones that were made by my crew at Westminster with the mental health problems. The backgrounds and the Oatleys were made by my professional colleagues, and they're much tidier and sort of more controlled and made in a way that I had learned how to make mosaic. And there was something kind of free and lively about the other pieces. And so I thought, okay, we could do it without professional help. I could just have a team of people who had never done it before, and we could make something that worked. I wasn't quite sure what, but then there was another light bulb moment. While I was working at Mental Health Project, I ordered a book of Tunisian mosaics as a source of inspiration for people. And this gave me an idea, because North African mosaics have survived incredibly well, and also there are, even in Roman times, there was a disproportionately large amount of them. They loved mosaic. They had all these fantastic colours because they were on the edge of the desert and lots of different stones. And so, as well as the normal repertoire of mythological scenes and patterns and things, you get these examples which are scenes of everyday life. So this is life on a farm in Roman North Africa. And I read that archaeologists have found these mosaics incredibly useful because they record things about everyday life in Roman times that no other sources do. People didn't write about what tools look like and how they actually, what their farming practices were like. So I like the idea that it was a way of leaving a historical record. I think there's one more, yes. Well, and also they're very lively, they're dynamic. And they're kind of divided up into different bits. So that would also work really well as a group project, different people could get different bits. So that was my attempt at doing a North African style Roman mosaic, but for London to celebrate the Olympics. It was obvious to me, the Olympics come from the classical world, mosaic comes from the classical world. What London needs to celebrate the 2012 Olympics was a mosaic, but I don't think anybody else really quite made that connection. But I hawked the idea around various boroughs, and then and the only one who showed any interest was Hackney, and that's why I ended up here. And they had the idea of working with the recovery services here. This was a group who I hadn't worked with before, so that was a bit scary to begin with, but actually there's a huge amount of overlap between mental health problems and addiction problems, so it felt quite familiar. My team from the Westminster project also were very keen to keep going, so they came along and helped out as well. I have to say the design had to change quite a bit. Well, we had to find a wall. I spent some weeks going to every park in Hackney. As you know, there are more parks in Hackney than in the other borough. But none of the walls I found were considered acceptable by the council. They chose Shepherdess Walk, which was a very neglected area, famous for antisocial behaviour, I think, and very tucked away. And I think they thought, well, if it's a total mess, nobody will ever see it anyway. People will probably take it down. Yeah. So that's what was chosen for me, and that's how it turned out. And that was 6 months' work. There one or two changes. We couldn't have a bonfire. That was against the bylaws. The dogs had to be on leads. Conform to the bylaws. But hey, you know, it still, it worked. And then nobody wanted to stop. They wanted to go on. So we went on. Wow. Everybody wanted to sign it, so there were name panels. That became a sort of theme where we've had space to do that. The thing that people like most is writing their own names. And I gave them much more of a free hand then. I'm quite controlling about the other things, so anyway, they're very patient with me, and they more or less do what they're told. The pavements, even we managed to do 2 pavements here, and another wall piece celebrating the name of the place and the history as a sort of droving path to market. There they are. Yeah, we were celebrating the achievement. There was a real sheep there as well, but I couldn't get him to get into it. But we'd made some papier-mâché ones, so that was all right. Nalani in the foreground I don't know if she still does, work for the council and paid our invoices, but she loved to dress up. So that was good. So then we were on a roll, and we had a supporter in the council who got us this job, which is next to the Sainsbury's on Old Street at the bottom of Pitfield Street. Nicely paid for by Sainsbury's. The council very kindly made it a condition of Sainsbury's getting that shop that they had to have. And I thought, yeah, this is the life. This is how it's going to be. You know, the council's going to be on our side and giving us lovely commissions forever. And they did carry on for a bit. So this is Hackney Downs, which you may have seen. And with this commission for the children's playground came our studio in the building next to it, and the pavilion on Hackney Downs, which was a sort of white elephant for them, built as changing rooms. And I think they had an internal competition amongst different council departments to see if they could find a use for this building, which wasn't being used as changing rooms. And Carol, our supporter, won the competition, saying we could go there and then we could decorate the shelter. So this is based on North Africa, Jordan, not far away, but anyway, I've just visited there, hugely inspired. Very late antique mosaics they have there. So they're very simple, but very bold and very lively, and translated, style that just work perfectly for the work of many hands, and not too difficult to interpret, but full of vitality. So there's this kind of a story here. There's a mouse. There's a little. Oh no! Go back. Go back. That's the mouse. That's the mouse. The mouse chases the elephant, and that sets off the thing. And they're all running around in a total state of panic. And then at the sides, the other animals are just looking on, amazed at the amount of chaos. But again, it was made far quicker than I could possibly have imagined, and more and more. So then we had to do the panel above with the names, and then we had to do the palm trees side by side, and but then that came to an end, and our protector at the council was made redundant, of course, and I was told that there was no more money forthcoming. So we had a bit of money in the bank from the Sainsbury's job. So we just kept going, really. The wild animals in the shelter had given us the idea that, no, they had been seen by somebody who worked for London Zoo. And he had messaged me at that time and said, oh, there might be a job in the offing. So I really didn't want to give up the project until I knew whether we really were going to get a job at the zoo. And because it was London Zoo, it took a very long time to come through. But it did eventually. So we did this for the Land of the Lions. And again, it's a little story about antelope and monkeys working collaboratively to fend off the hungry lions. I didn't know this, but apparently the male lions don't usually do the hunting. They send their wives off to do it, so he's just sitting there watching. But it's okay because the antelopes have been alerted by the monkeys who see further from the tops of the trees, so everybody gets away. It's okay. That was a lovely job to do, and the lions are actually behind that wall, so installing that was pretty good fun. Yeah. Don't know what we do next. Yeah, so we did. We started doing kind of outreach projects with people who did have some funding. So this was at St Anne's Psychiatric Hospital. Very, very interesting project. We went there. We went to St Anne's to do it. It was a locked ward, so the patients couldn't come to us. The design is based on a drawing done by one of the patients. I think he was an ex-patient actually. But rather touchingly, the centrepiece is the open gates because, you know, they want a locked ward and this is what they dreamed of. So it was called the Garden of Hope, and they sit in the ward, and this is down in their smoking area so they can see it. I found it interesting. It was an interesting experience. Unfortunately, most of the patients were so heavily medicated that they didn't really have the concentration to get very far with this. But the drawings were lovely, and I don't know if you can see in the bottom corner there's a little TARDIS. One of the guys on the ward at the time was an artist, and he still comes to the project from time to time. He works now helping other people with mental health problems, and he very much has embraced it as a sort of part of the mindful way of being and helping people with those kind of problems. So it wasn't ideal, but it had a very good outcome in some ways. Then we really were beginning to scrape the barrel for money. Hackney, the council had finally noticed that we hadn't moved out of our building on Hackney Downs, and the condition for remaining there was to pay them rent, so we needed more money. We did this for St Paul's West Hackney for the little play area there. This was a design I'd done for the children's play area in Hackney Downs, and so just kind of recycling that. But that really was the end of our money. But after that, I think we then went on and did these two, and the West Hackney Parochial Fund came to our rescue and gave us a small grant to do this. Meanwhile, I was manically applying for grants. I think in that year, as well as contemplating suicide quite often, I applied for 13 grants. After about the 10th grant, somebody explained to me that actually grants don't cover rent. And since that was our major expense, I began to wonder what the point was. I still don't understand why they don't cover rent, but anyway, that's apparently the rule. Yes, totally unsuccessful in getting grants. So that obviously wasn't going to work. So we went rather back to the kind of commissions model. This was another one that we kind of more or less funded ourselves. Again, with a little bit of thanks to the West Hackney Parochial Fund. The vicar there was a great sport of ours, and some of his parishioners came to the project. So we started doing the dogs. This is on Hackney Downs. You know, I'd been going to the pavilion for a few years by then, and always watching the dogs running around the park and thinking what a great subject it was. Also admiring the wildflower meadow, which is very, very successful there, and being rather frustrated that people didn't seem to know the names of the flowers. I'm obsessed with the names of flowers myself, and I thought, people need to know. So that that was another idea that proved to have legs, because identifying things, teaching things, things in the public realm. I think they have to entertain, but it's quite nice if you learn things from them as well. So that was the idea behind that. But when we started doing the running dogs, they were just generic dogs to begin with, but these two Harry and Sugar, they belong to one of my volunteers, and she said, can't I put their names above them so that people know? You can hardly see on this image, but because I was a bit nervous about this, hadn't done this before, didn't know if it was really a good idea. But once we'd started, then everybody said, well, why can I have my dog? What about my dog? So then we went back and started doing some dogs. And then I realised that people would pay. So this was another fundraising thing. So then there was some more dogs. And then there was some more. And there are now sort of nearly 100. The only slight fly in the ointment is that Hackney, in their great wisdom, have said they don't want any more mosaics in their parks. So occasionally we sneak them in. There is another row going in next week. This was the launch party for the dog mosaic. Slightly difficult to arrange the group photo, but it was pretty good fun. So that's kind of the model for how we work, really. We do a mixture of where we can get them. We get proper, nicely paid public commissions. This was one of those. The Acton estate by Haggerston, I don't know if you've come across that, paid for by London and Quadrant Housing Association, rather grudgingly, but as a sop to some irate residents. So we benefited from that, and the residents wanted something that recorded local history. So it's a picture of kind of farmland, and it harks back it's called the Acton Estate, named after Nathaniel Acton, who was the landowner in the 18th century when it was still market gardens, and I don't know if they had donkeys then, but hey, a little bit of artistic license, again based on a specific late antique mosaic that I'd been to see at Heraclea Lyncestis in Macedonia, where there are animals grazing under fruit trees. Of course, being a Roman mosaic, the animals are actually attacking each other, and there's quite a bit of blood spurting. So, again, it was a lovely one to do because everybody could have their own animal. And we also did some workshops with the residents of the estate, and they made some of the border sections, and they put their initials in the border sections. So they put their little pieces. That was my bit. So that was a nice public commission. Then we were invited back to the zoo. And these lovely high-profile panels either side of the main entrance. They're actually on the outside of the zoo, so you don't have to pay to see them. The zoo chose the animals. I was expecting it to be lions and tigers and that kind of thing, but apparently they didn't want the charismatic megafauna because they attract bad publicity from time to time. The tigers can attack their young and their mates and things that happened quite recently. And whereas the penguins and the squirrel monkeys are sort of disaster-free. They don't attract bad publicity, so they were considered safe to be the poster boys for the zoo. So that's pretty nice job to get. And this is not far from the zoo. This is in Regent's Park. So again, not beyond Hackney, but it's our sort of outpost in Camden. So the brief for this was it had to combine English wildlife because it's in the Royal Park with the idea of play because it was in a beautifully refurbished children's playground. So they've got a lot of animals playing. That was the idea. to begin with, I did have a badger doing a headstand, but I was told I couldn't have a badger because there weren't badgers in Regent's Park. There might be badgers in other royal parks, but not in Regent's Park, and they're incredibly territorial. And what they do have in Regent's Park is hedgehogs. It's quite interesting, I didn't know that. I was sorry, we've only got the back end of a hedgehog there, but yeah, but there's quite a lot of hedgehogs in the mosaic because that's what they wanted to publicise. This was a great job, and I feel this is how the future should be, but it's the only job like this we've ever had. But you never know, might one day in the future. So this was for a new development. This was for Tower Court in Stamford Hill. And the architects there, it was an old council estate, and they decanted everybody and then they rebuilt it, plus lots of private stuff to sell, which is kind of what happens, the standard model for redevelopment in Hackney. But the architects got in touch with us right at the beginning of the process, and we were kind of written into the contract documents. So we were there, we were embedded in the thing. The decanted residents had already chosen the names they wanted. There are 4 blocks, and they wanted them to represent local wildlife. So there is Kingfisher, Barbell the fish, Peregrine, and Dorbenton the bat. And I don't know if you know Tower Court, but there is actually a tower there. There's this strange old folly that was sort of held up by structural ivy, and I think during the redevelopment work somebody cut through the ivy, so how long the tower is going to be there I don't know, because there weren't any leaves, certainly, the ivy was very dead, but the brickwork was still there. And in the background you can see the spire of the church, the Agapemonite church. Do you know the Agapemonite church? If you don't know it, you have to go. It's just unbelievably fantastic. There's another thing about that a bit later on. But yeah, so that's a little floor panel in the seating area, and then at the entrance to each of the blocks there are mosaics of the relevant animals. There are a couple of other ones as well. Actually, 2 of the bigger blocks have 2 entrances, and so they have bigger panels as well. And I just love doing this project because it means that it has character. You know, it's not just exactly the same as all the other developments that you see everywhere. You know, buildings have become more and more identical. An architect told me they were all designed by the same computer program, and they certainly look like that. You know, just press a button and they generate more. But you know, doing something like this, it doesn't cost very much, particularly if you have a team of fantastic volunteers like I do. But you know, they're all out there. You're all out there. You know, it's not that difficult to do these things, and if people do it with love and enthusiasm, it shows, and then it just makes the city richer, and it makes people's lives richer. You know, if you live in these blocks, I don't know, there's something special about it. So I think that's how all developments should go in the future. It's not down to me. Yeah, and we also did the numbers for the lift lobbies as well. So we were, and we did the sign outside. So we were really, we were sewn into the project, and I think that was great. The numbers were lovely. Let's go back to the numbers for a minute, because of course now they're installed, you only get one at a time. And they're actually at their best there, where you can see them all together. I think the architects wanted them to be in black and white, and I said no, I don't think so. I think it's too boring for everybody to do. And that's another thing that's really great about working in this way, is that you're looking at designs and thinking they've got to be fun to make. They've got to give something to the people who are doing the work. They can't just be an idea kind of slapped down on people. And I think that helps generate more things that are more interesting to look at as well. So some of the patterns I drew for people, because some people really don't want to be bothered with thinking things up, but some people wanted to play, and so some of them, people had a free hand. again, I was a little bit controlling about the colours, and it's like, but within that, they could have fun. And so you get this incredible variety and richness. And it doesn't have to be housing associations and developers who commissioned mosaics. This was Somerford Grove, another local estate, and the clever tenants there had managed to secure a grant from the Mayor of London, I think, and they spent they're a gardening group, so it was primarily to restock their planters and to help them through the year, but they spent some of it on commissioning us to make a couple of mosaics for their raised beds. And we did some workshops with them as well, so that they had involvement in the previous picture. Sorry, can you go back a minute? So it's like, you often get this with community projects. There's a dog, that's obviously somebody's dog. There's a cat, fair enough. And then there's a cockatiel, because there was a cockatiel that lived on me. But it's nice. It records a moment in time as well as so yeah, that was a nice one. And then we do private commissions as well, and that has been helpful because it sort of generates a bit of income. These are both front gardens, and that's always nice because that means it is in the public realm as well as being a private thing. So front garden path, Baston Road, just sort of not far from Hackney Downs, but north of Hackney Downs, featuring the owner's 2 dogs and his favourite birds. Makes a nice front garden path. This one, further afield, this one is actually in Brighton, which is why it features chalkland flowers and starlings. The owner was very fond of starlings, as am I, so that was nice. And it's right on the street, so you can see that as they go past. These 2 are in back gardens. The tiger inspired by the Henri Rousseau painting. I changed it a lot to make it work in mosaic, and I left out the rain. The actual painting is in a terrific downpour, and of course when we came to install it, that was a terrific downpour. A sort of revenge that I hadn't put it in the mosaic and put it on us instead. And this one is in a back garden in Hackney, and this one is inspired by the Agapemonite church in Stamford Hill, which has the most incredible stained glass designed by Walter Crane. It's a very controversial church, and a lot of people don't like it. They have strange ideas about free love, and apparently one of the 19th century vicars tried to walk across Clapton Pond. I don't know quite what happened. Yeah, it was probably all right, so it's from that deep. But anyway, history doesn't relate. Surviving in that way with some big commissions and some small-ish domestic commissions, we sometimes have some money left over, and that means that we can make mosaics for people who don't have any money. Because I now have this team of volunteers, that I have to keep them busy all the time, and they get despondent if they don't have something to make. So we made this one for the Nightingale estate, which is borders on Hackney Downs, and it's a picture of the park with the train going on in the background, and with the avenue of plane trees and the distant view of the city. You never quite see it like that, of course. And probably hopefully you would never see quite so many foxes in one go. But because things have to be fun to make, everybody wanted to make a fox, so you get a lot of foxes. But there's some bats as well, and a sneaky hedgehog. One of my volunteers says he's seen a hedgehog on Hackney Downs. I don't know. So I gave him the benefit of that and put it in the mosaic, but I haven't seen one yet. This is one that we're working on at the moment. This photo was taken a while back. Actually, we're much further along with this. So we're doing this for Surrey Docks Farm. One of my volunteers at the project also volunteers at Surrey Docks Farm. So we've sort of made a bit of a link with them. And historically, they obviously, there are a few old mosaics at the farm, usually made with, mudlarking fines, and they haven't weathered terribly well. But obviously at some point they had big ambitions, and there are these recesses in the ground waiting for mosaics, and they are just too tempting. So so we're filling those in. Those should be going in this summer. And we make things to sell as well. So this is the wall of our workshop at the moment. How am I doing? Yes, that's okay. I started by saying how the commercial project floundered due to problems with premises, and we hope the same won't happen to this project, but we are under threat of losing our building, our studio in the pavilion at Hackney Downs, because they want to turn it into a cafe. Obviously there isn't enough coffee in Hackney, and but it's a very big building actually, and it could easily be kind of subdivided, and I would have to get used to not having the luxury of possibly the best studio in London, because we have so much space, and it's in the middle of a park, and we have been unbelievably lucky. And good things don't last forever. But I could probably, scale down to work in part of it. The project is now very much the people who come to it, the volunteers, and a lot of them have physical problems. So the option of moving very far away is it wouldn't really help, because then a lot of the people couldn't come with me, and that would kind of change the whole nature of the thing. So I'm still hoping that we will be able to stay where we are. We have new green overlords, and hopefully they might be more sympathetic. I don't know. So watch this space. We don't quite know. This was last summer's moment of glory when, so this is another of the naming ones, some Hackney birds, and we were invited to put something into the Royal Academy Summer Show, and I, sent them pictures of some smallish panels, and they said, no, we want something big. So they chose this, and it was hung in the most beautiful room in the Royal Academy, and it looked very fine, I think. Yeah. And it went to its home. And this is work installed this year. So these are embedded in the pavement in Hoxton Street. There's another one further up that I didn't include here, which is quite interesting. It's just next to the garden. Is it Hoxton's? No, it's not Hoxton Square. I don't know, Hoxton Garden anyway. That's based on an existing mosaic in the garden that was designed by David Bellamy, the TV presenter, and made by him as well, apparently. I don't know, nobody quite remember how it had happened, but it's a very beautifully made mosaic. He did it with a friend, and I think the friend must have really known what they were doing. So it starts off, the row along the street starts off with a little one that echoes his one in the park, and then we've got one in front of the library. Again, the librarians were keen that it would be something that would entice small children into the library. So it's animals reading book. They're reading. Hoxton Hall. Hoxton Hall. That's again, it was meant to be inclusive and entertaining. So that's that one. And then finally on Hoxton Street, this we installed last week. So this is our latest. It's been about 3 years in the making. Again, an identification panel. So in fact, this one started before the sunbirds. And again, this is one that we've just donated to Following Court. I started this project because I needed something for people to make. And it was close to my heart because it's identifying birds. So then I had to try and find a wall, and somebody suggested this rather lovely old brick wall that is part of the sort of the communal space of the Following Court estate. And the tenants were happy to have something stuck on their wall. And they were patient because they weren't having to pay for it. So the fact is it took nearly 3 years, then, they couldn't complain. But yes, much to my relief, we did manage to get it installed this week. And so you can't see it like that. You can only see it obliquely from Hoxton Street. When you're walking south down Hoxton Street, you can see it. Okay, that's it. So yeah. More present.